Welcome everyone. We are having fun in the green room. You probably we're just having fun here. Welcome to another Life Guides Connect. I'm super excited for this conversation to happen this time. It's one of the greatest and best times to be alive. I am your leading guide, Dr. Dave Hester, and I'd like to introduce the wonderful people who are going to assist me in this great conversation we're going to have today. Want to start by introducing Leslie. Leslie is a certified life guide, spiritual coach, intuitive guidance coach, and Reiki master teacher. Leslie connects her intuitive gifts and ability to help guide others to a path of purpose, self-healing, clarity, and balance. Leslie has discovered one of her greatest joys and accomplishments is being of service to others from a place of love, compassion, and understanding. Leslie's expertise includes embracing change, stress and anxiety, building community, being a caregiver, as well as a caregiver to an aging parent. So, Leslie, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And thank you so much for that wonderful, warm introduction.
Well, it's warm and true. This morning I was listening to some Reiki music, and we had talked about your work, and I was like, let me just listen to something to get my, body right, flowing in the morning. So
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
And also with us is the illustrious Richard. It's big facts. Big facts. So by trade, Richard is a classically trained chef and cookbook author who lets the seasons guide him to a global taste experience. I'm about to say that again for the people in the back. A cookbook author who lets the seasons guide him to a global taste experience. He has traveled and lived around the world, indulging in the thrill of adventure, while also enjoying the comfort and security of home. As a certified life guide, Richard promotes not only our community, he's a big help within our allyship training, and we appreciate him for that, along with just providing universality of compassion and respect. He's taught so many of us, perhaps, that compassion is the action of what we have to do. Richard's topics include community, communication, healthy eating, weight management, time management, as well as grief and loss. And as I said, the illustrious Richard is here to support us on this conversation. So thanks for being here, Richard.
My pleasure. Thank you. It's an honor.
Outstanding. So, everyone, we appreciate the people who are attending live. We see you. Thank you. Feel free to drop some lines in the chat if you feel so inclined. We also want to say hello to the people watching in the archive. Thank you for your attention. It's one of the most valuable things that you can provide anything or anyone in this world. So we appreciate you giving you our attention or giving us your attention. I had to flip that real quick. Mm-hmm. All right. So as we are, for those of you who may not know, today we're talking about everything DE&I as well as belonging, DEI and B. The B part is increasingly becoming more important as we continue to build these structures in. But before we do that, I want to say, just a shout out to everyone who's going to be celebrating all the festivities this month. That includes Father's Day, which is coming up, the summer solstice, which will be, I believe, at the end of June, Juneteenth, which will be next Wednesday. Looking forward to celebrating that. And then also Pride Month as a whole, and Pride towards the end of the week. So shout out to my LGBTQIA+. I heard a funny word, or not funny in a mean way, but a funny word of how to say that. I'm not going to say it right now because we're still figuring it out, because terminology is constantly changing, and you have to be able to kind of move with the flow and be open. And I want to share one thing before we get started as well. My daughter went to a Pride party yesterday, which for those of you who have kids, my daughter is a teenager. This is a conversation that is needed within the community for support and protection. These kids do not feel protected in this current environment. So the fact that my child can go to one of these as an ally, to support her friends who are a part of the community, is a wonderful thing, because she's helping others feel safe. So I wanted to start there, but let's go ahead and jump in. Richard, if you want to kick us off with just your not your experience, but where do you see belonging going as we're starting to build that into structures within work and within our lifestyle at home?
Well, I think you've already identified where belonging is going. Your daughter just fully illuminated that. And it gives me great hope and joy to hear that someone in their teens is going to a pride party. I met my people in, dark alleyways, if you will, not literally, but those were the days. So the fact that they're in full light and celebration of cross identities, that's where hopefully we all are going and where we all truly belong. Because diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's great. But if we don't all belong there, then what does it matter? It means
Right.
nothing.
Absolutely. I like that you mentioned that we don't belong there. I'm going to do a lot of references today to Mitch Kapoor and Frida Kapoor Klein, who wrote a wonderful book. I don't have it with me at the moment, called Closing the Equity Gap. But they talk specifically about distance travel, and lived experience and how important that is to choosing not only candidates for jobs, but just also if you are an investor looking to invest in people who have had a longer distance travel. So what that means, distance travel, I'll use myself as an example. I started community college before attending college because of my track, my record, my path required me to do community college credits before going, which made it a longer distance for me to get to college, and then even longer distance to get out. And so people who have those life experiences and that longer distance, they come with so much spice. I talked about Richard's, collecting spices from around the world. It's really important to make a really delicious and prosperous dish, to use a little bit of food terminology there, is to include all of those spices. So I want to bring that also back to you, Leslie, and talk a little bit more about belonging and about perhaps how you feel others can support or even promote belonging in their community.
Well, I think today is an example of having those difficult conversations that sometimes we want to avoid. I think the exposure to those conversations and allowing people to share whatever end of the spectrum they stand on, to share how they feel. And when you can do that, and when you can bring those feelings up to the surface and the transparency, I think sometimes what that does is it makes others feel comfortable. It gives the allies information to carry on into other communities and to continue that extension in the workplace. And then once you have identified those areas that are maybe sensitive subjects and we can get around those sensitive areas, then we have a discussion. Then we have the ingredients again to kind of set things where everyone feels heard. They feel like they can belong. It gives them a sense of sometimes identity because they don't know how to identify with self. That's very real. Just because it could be fear. So I think a lot of it starts with the difficult conversations, honestly, and just giving people a space, holding light sometimes for people to share. It's very important because someone like Richard or myself that is a part of the LGBTQIA community, I think our beam is very sturdy in the sense that we are comfortable with who we are, but we are interacting with others that may not be. And so I think it's very important that we kind of hold that beam and kind of set the marker so that can continue on. And as we move forward, you can see the growth around that because there was something to kind of anchor in that positive energy and light so people can evolve from the old ways of not wanting to share or just the taboo of things. And a lot of us people just don't understand. They don't know, and then they don't know how to make a difference. So I hope I didn't go off too much on a tangent, but there's so much there that I want to share. So it's all just coming out. So I'm just
That's all fine. That's all fine.
Yeah.
And I like that you mentioned, the difficult conversations, because
Yeah.
that's what we're going to have today, people. These
Mhm.
are difficult conversations that you're going to also have within your workplace. And these
Yes.
conversations have to happen. We have to start building in these structures so that people can feel safe. Like building psychological safety is an important piece to your employee resilience, your team resilience, so that they can feel like they can bring something up. And I want to bring something up that happened within um, our organization. Richard, brought something to my attention, and it was a difficult conversation, and we had to have it. But the fact that he felt strong enough that he could, one, be heard, like speak and be heard, and not just discarded, like, all right, whatever you're saying doesn't really matter. And the fact that he wanted to share his experience helped us change as an organization so that we can. And I'm not saying we're perfect. We're still working. There's still some things that we have to work out and get better at. But just being able to bring that up is hugely impactful, for the people who are marginalized, or the people who don't feel like that they are being heard. So, Richard, we talk about the challenges facing organizations. Let me ask you a wild question. How much do you think is there a heavier onus on what's happening within their organization, or a heavier part about what's happening in their life? And I'm asking this purposely because I know of your experience. So what do you feel like weighs more, the challenges of life or the challenges that you may experience in an organization?
Well, of course, given my circumstance where I am, it's my life right now. And that's because it's about something that's very precious and fragile. So that takes my attention. However, that being said, um, all the words being thrown around and the energy being put forth, if companies do not walk the walk, then all of this is for naught. So I can have a personal life that really represents and shows me full on how precious life is and how fortunate I am to have been seen and to have been loved. And then I hear all this external dialogue. You hear about Target removing LGBT, merchandise, and the latest was, Starbucks doing the same. And it's like, why? It's like, so slightest push and everything we work for crumbles. And I'm not just talking about the queer community. I'm talking about everybody belongs.
Mhm.
Everybody is marginalized. And since everyone is marginalized, we should all have empathy and compassion for the other. I don't have to live your life, but I can feel your life. And there is no excuse from my perspective that is not being followed through. And I'm a person where you can give me as many words as you want, but your actions are what speak to me. I have a good vocabulary. I know your words, but I also know what they mean.
Absolutely. Res non verba. If this were a Latin class.
Yeah, except English words. But anyway, but thank you.
So, an interesting piece about what you're mentioning there about, really walking the walk. We're also coming up on the 3-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And if you remember, right after that happened, there was all this pledging of, organizations talking about they're going to, support nonprofits or support, justice initiatives. And the Washington Post did an article showing that the 50 billion that was pledged by organizations, only less than 0.5% was actually accounted for as being spent.
Hmm.
And that's a clear example about doing what you're saying what you're doing, using your actions, deeds, not words. And we're seeing that in organizations now because many of them are defunding DE&I. Heck, DE&I in some places is a curse word, which is baffling.
Well, as
But
we
it's
discussed,
true.
Chick-fil-A, right?
Yes.
Chick-fil-A did it because it politically was correct thing for them to do. But if you know anything about Chick-fil-A, they don't really, it's a very narrow definition that they hold. And that's fine. I can choose to go to Chick-fil-A or choose not to go to Chick-fil-A. They can hold their narrow view. I can hold my view. They can coexist. But the fact that their DEI person is being kind of victimized out there in the press and by a percentage of the population, it's like, it just blows my mind, particularly if you look at their little happy commercials on TV where it's, everyone but a gay person, of course, because that's just a big no-no for them. But, the rest of the rainbow is represented.
Yeah.
And, and again, that's fine. I can choose to go there or not go there. But the fact that, it just doesn't, again, it's a disconnect. So you can't be performative. You have to be truly action-oriented. It is about action, and it's action of spirit. It's an action of listening and the action of asking good questions.
Let's continue asking good questions. Leslie, and I'm not putting it all on, just from your perspective.
Well, thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Right. And I want to say this
Leslie.
also because sometimes, there's a motif of, Black women to the rescue again. They're going to come and fix everything. We're not doing that. I'm not putting that pressure on you. But what I'm going to ask is,
represent everyone,
represent everyone and say, how can an organization do some actionable steps to continue to maintain DEI, but also to really, improve the working conditions for everyone?
Good question. I think, and you said it well, as far as the defunding that's happening, right? There's a defunding that's going on in a lot of different business sectors, and where we then have to pick the ball up. We have to then put it in our court and make it our responsibility to bring these things together. And I think, we'll just use LifeGuides as an example. We saw a need, we brought it together, and we brought more awareness. And now we're a lot further along than we were last year, bringing that awareness to our organization. And I think, and we got hit with a wall, when we tried to initiate this in the beginning, but we kind of went around that wall. And I think that's where other businesses and organizations have to sit down and say, okay, this is what we don't have, but this is what we do have. And if you allow people to feel safe in an environment, I think, and that doesn't cost anything to feel safe. You don't have to go into budget for that. So, but if you can create a platform for others to feel safe, then I think that then they have options as to how to get around the budget cuts, how to get around the organizations that won't fund it, but they'll say, okay, here's an opportunity. And then leaders just have to kind of take that next step and say, okay, this is where I see the need. Let's just have an after work discussion. It may not even be a paid discussion, but it may just be a place where people can feel safe to come and share and say, hey, I've been thinking about this, but I haven't had an opportunity to share it. I don't know if it would be appropriate. I don't want it to be any type of backlash. I don't want to, so you just want to create a space. And I think from there, through the dialogue, there's things that will come up. I think there will be things that will be put on the table, and then you kind of sort those pieces out and you'll see what needs the most attention and what can get the attention a little bit later down the line. And then you just build the structure from there. But you have to create a safe space. And I think, in our homes, sometimes we don't have a safe space. Some people may not, they may not feel safe there. And their only safe place is actually work. It could be the reverse, so, but you got to ask those questions. You got to be in tune and you got to be connected. And that is the job and responsibility of the leaders in these companies. And if they feel like it's not their problem or they don't want to deal with it, I think that's, you're just putting a Band-Aid on something that's going to need surgery later, honestly.
So, but then again, so the words don't then equal the action, right?
Absolutely.
If I'm looking up at the C-suite and they don't represent that sense of belonging themselves, is it a safe space?
No, it's not.
Right?
And right.
So
yeah,
I need, and at this point, it's not tokenism. There's too many well-educated and experienced people not to be choosing from the biggest freaking pool.
Yes. Agree.
So all of us should at some point be able to find that person to identify with. I don't have to find the mirror image of Richard. I have to find the spiritual, intellectual, emotional mirror of Richard.
Yeah. Yeah. So that mirrors back to you. And then when that mirrors back, then
that creates safety.
Yes, it does.
And the ability to start dialoguing.
Yeah. And you have those strong pillars. Right. It is. You have those pillars and you can build on that. And you don't know what that's going to look like once you start that building, because there are others that just don't know how. They don't know how. So you have to kind of lead in that direction so that you can say, hey, this is a suggestion. They may have suggestions, so they're just afraid to share, but it has to be discussed. And you kind of have to look at it and say, okay, how can I contribute to this to make it better than it was before we got to this space?
Yes. That part, making it better so that the person coming behind you doesn't experience those same challenges.
Yes.
My ideal, situation is to try to be the leader that I've always wanted to be around or have. And it's the same thing with, like you said, the C-suite leaders, not just to have a token, in that situation, but to really intentionally, you have to meet intention with action. Because sometimes people have really good intention. We really want to be inclusive. We really want to invite people from different walks of life, but our actions are not necessarily following our intentions. And that dissonance happens more often than we'd like to admit. And what I think is important is to admit it happens and to not be judgmental that you stop. Because I want to ask both of you another question, which is, do you feel like there is a DE&I fatigue?
It's hard for me to say or answer that with a yes, because I live in that section of the world that I am, and I'm so grateful that I am part of that section. Being part of a community that is historically marginalized, and I give you a list of reasons why or which communities I belong to that are marginalized. It's not just my private orientation. But that also for me is my superpower. It has made me such a better human being that if you're exhausted, that's your problem. I ain't, because I'm not ready to die. My exhaustion means I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
So, if you speak to the people who live on that side of the street, we might be tired of asking for attention in a positive way, but we're not tired. Or at least I'll speak for myself. I'm not tired. I battle on. If that's what it takes, then that's what it takes. So, we all, it's like came last year. We all want to be seen. I don't care what you understand. I just want you to see me.
Yeah, agree. And the fatigue, I think, comes in when you're stopping the flow, when it doesn't look, I think people experience the fatigue when it doesn't look like how they think it's supposed to look, or they think that it's not making an impact. And sometimes it's a slow process and they get tired before the breakthrough. And we do that in our own individual lives because we don't see the immediate breakthrough and we go, oh, I'm so tired of that. Oh, it just sounds like a broken record. We just keep going over the same thing. But I think sometimes it has to be that squeaky wheel. You have to keep biting at it, because doing that is bringing awareness. And there's some people that weren't on the scene in the beginning. They're just coming on. They're just saying, hey, how can I help? How can I be a part of this? So you want to address them as well. You don't want to just say, okay, we've been here. I understand, especially under the business sector, the fatigue sometimes gets heavy because you're up against so much. It's not just your own personal thing. You're up against a corporation, or you're up against, the hierarchy that's saying, hey, we want to do it this way. And it's just, sometimes people feel frustrated and they say, just why even bother? Just why even bother? And that's that thing I'm saying, as far as you can't just say, We just won't address that. Oh, we'll just let it go because it will come back. It's coming back. And whether it comes back in your own yard, usually is how it happens. That's the law with karma. It comes back in your own yard somehow. And then you're then still forced out into that, okay, I can't ignore this. It's something is ringing in my ears to get my attention that this is so needed. This attention is needed. So I honestly, I just feel like, yeah, you might be tired, but we got to keep going. We have to keep going because there's no room for us to say the fatigue is going to win this out. There's just not, or we're going to be going up 3 paces and we're going to be taken 4 back if we do that. And I just think we've come too far. We've come too far. We may not see the result of what we wanted the finalized picture to look like, the final, but I think that there have been some strides. And I've seen that in our own organization, which is, again, from the time I've started with LifeGuides, it's refreshing. It is, honestly, it's refreshing. So yeah, excited to see where it's growing though. There's more to come.
There's more to come.
More to come.
I want to highlight one thing that Richard said, which really struck me as soon as you said it. You were talking about the difference between your life business life and your private life, and one thing about just talking about where we are with people getting into others' private lives. I find it odd that we are so concerned about what happens behind closed doors with human beings, which is inherently none of our business, yet we make it our business. And I'm not saying this to be a grandstanding, pontificating, liberal, whatever. I'm just saying it because we've got bigger things to worry about, bigger things to really put our attention to. Because remember, I said it earlier, your attention is the best thing. It's the most valuable thing you can do, or that you can give to others or other situations. And so when I hear people say things like, how can we be the change? When I start with being the change, I say, check yourself, check your inherent biases, cognitive, racial, or otherwise. And once you are aware of them, what are you going to do to challenge it? So I wanted to ask both of you, what has been your experience with overcoming or even becoming aware of some of your biases?
It's interesting. So again, it's just in speaking from a queer community point of view, for a second, we're not, like I said, a monolith. I don't necessarily engage in various and sundry identities within the queer community. They don't appeal to me. They're just not my bailiwick. And it took me a long time not to be angry at them because I thought they were taking my shine away. I didn't realize I could flourish simultaneously. And I needed to learn that their joy took nothing away from mine. And so I have grown into that. I've grown into, take a breath, Richard. Are you feeling that it's a reflection of you because you're not comfortable doing that? Or, is it just, wow, I can't believe I'm witnessing this. It's amazing. Where are you in the moment? And it's a matter of learning to take a beat. As something comes across your brain, you need to check yourself and be, why am I thinking this? Particularly if it's a judgmental, is not saying every thought should be checked, but things like that, I need to check. I mean, I love gay pride. I remember the parades in my early 20s and, I lived in New York, San Francisco, LA, Sydney. I mean, I went to some wild parade days around the world. And part of what I loved is that it showed me we were so multifaceted. And it taught me to start taking that beat and going, oh, but there I am in that group. I'm definitely not that group. Take that collar off my neck. It's just not me. So, but it taught me that, yeah, I can see both now because I can see where I am. So knowing that I have a landing, a square that is mine to look at across the vista of humanity, that's great now because now it's this beautiful panorama. It's not this precarious perch.
Perfect word. Perfect word. So,
Yeah.
Leslie, how about you?
So definitely I feel one of my biases that I put, and I found this out the hard way. I feel like when my involvement in the LGBTQIA community, okay, I feel like my understanding and my level of connection to that, I bottled up in a sense, okay? And this was probably one of the it was a huge learning and pivotal moment for me because you just can't bottle it's not a it's to me it's not now I understand. It's not a concept, it's not a fad, it's not something that you can bottle up and say, "Oh, let's just take the lid off of this." It's so wide and expansive to sometimes to the fact that sometimes I question whether I am informed enough to be under that LGBTQIA community, right? And be an ally in a sense because, and we had this brief discussion, do I know enough information? Do I know enough to support? And that is where I had to learn a lot more, not only about myself, but also about where I stand in that community. And like you said, Richard, beautifully, it's okay for you to shine over here and let that be. And I had to be okay with that because I kept saying, "Oh, is it all or nothing?" It's not an all or nothing. That's that capsulizing and putting it in this little bubble, and that's not what it's about. And I think going in and saying, "Oh, you know what? I'm a part of this community. This is what this looks like to me," was just totally off kilter. And so I had to regroup. I had to come back and say, is this really where I stand in as far as how I identify myself in relation to others I identify in that community? Or can we simultaneously exist? Just like Richard said. And it's so interesting because under that umbrella, there are so many different sectors that I just wasn't even aware of. I just labels, identities. Yeah. And
But
I
it goes
still
back to, but Leslie, then it goes back to asking good questions,
it does.
right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if it's part of the queer community. It doesn't matter if it's part of the African American community. It doesn't matter
Yes.
if it's part of the Latinx community. If we can ask good questions,
Yes.
then we learn more of what I think other people need to
Yep.
be seen and what we might actually recognize as well. This kind of like works for me, maybe. There's something
Yep.
really funky here that I might want to play with.
Right. It takes the assumptions and everything off the table. So then
Right.
you're looking from a totally different, you're looking at it from a totally different lens and it looks different. It really does. I think that's a part of that growth in that way. And it just makes you a stronger ally at some point where you can identify with people that are still at that beginning stage. And that's where that is actually where that strong link, that strong connection comes in. Because you can really identify and relate.
It's important to identify ourselves and others because
Mm-hmm.
100% we are each other experiencing our lives as humans, as different people. I don't mean to get all esoteric on everybody. Sorry to get all woo and stuff, but it's real. Like
It is.
Leslie is an experience of me. Richard's is an experience of me having a completely different experience. So asking
Yep.
those questions are important because you can also be curious and you
Yes.
can say, well, I don't know much about that. Are
Yep.
you comfortable with telling me more about that part of your culture? And just have to share a quick story. This was like 5 or 7 years ago. I was working with an individual who did not feel comfortable showing their real self at work. And so we decided to go out and have a cup of coffee, and they presented as their real self. And their real self is, and I'm just going to describe them, is a 6'4", seemingly what most people would instantly identify as a man, but she identifies as a woman. and she dressed accordingly in this long, luxurious dress with very, colorful stuff. And she said, I feel so much more comfortable because you asked, how do I see myself? Or how do I like to be addressed? Rather than just me calling him at that time his name because that's what's on the roster here. I asked her, what is it that, how do you like to be addressed? What is it that you really enjoy? What's the real you? And because there was that safe space between us, she opened up. We developed a great relationship and friendship from that. And I think sometimes we're afraid of the curiosity because of what it may look like for us. And I'll be honest, I thought me asking that could make me look like a bigot or something like that if I asked it wrong.
Mhm.
So I want to let's sit in this for a little bit about how can people ask better questions? How can they be curious in a acceptable way? Everybody's different. We know one size doesn't fit all. But what are some of your ideas on how people can ask really nice questions and feel heard?
Well, I think, Dave, you hit on, I think, the way you kind of get into it. First of all, you had a prior relationship. So you had already a sense of the human being you were engaging with, right? And you already represented that you were an empathetic person and you were asking with empathy because you wanted to understand more. And I think we need to really heal the bones of empathy that are broken in our culture. And we're not standing as strongly and proudly on those legs. And for me, when people ask me questions, I mean, my marriage, and people are like, well, I don't understand. You seem to be just like my marriage. How is that? Right. And I'm like, well, because opposites attract, and we bicker because we're opposites. you know. And yes, it's funny. I found the humanity in it because they were trying to walk in my shoes.
Mhm.
So for me, as long as I can feel the fact that that empathetic push to inquire, as opposed to I'm looking for a reason to negate you. I'm looking for that, okay, validation why scripture says, there it is. That's all fine and dandy for you. But again, I look at the universality of man, and we're all threads in the same tapestry. And without each thread, this tapestry does not exist.
And I would like to say, when you were making the comment about the question, just asking the right question so that you could get the right answers. Sometimes, let me just play the devil's advocate here for a second. Sometimes others don't make that process easy because either one, they're easily offended. You don't quite know how to ask those questions, and the other person doesn't make it any easier. And one of those reasons I think is because if that individual has issues, and as long as you're coming with the right intentions and from an empathetic place, just like Richard said, that makes a difference. But then if you get the contrast of the person feeling offended, or they feel like, why are you asking me that? Would you ask another person the same question, and they get all offended, and then you really didn't have any intentions on hurting anyone. You just wanted to know because you didn't know. I think those are moments also. I think that they are maybe teachable moments for the person that's asking the question in those sensitive areas to kind of say, to put out there that they didn't have any ill intentions, but how are we to support and how are we to know if we don't ask the right questions? And giving maybe the other person something to reflect on later on after they're done being offended, after they're done feeling victimized because you pointed out that you wanted to know something particular about either their dress, their gender, or whatever the case may be in their, in a culture around them. I think that we do have to look at it from both sides. because I've asked questions. People didn't even know that I was a part, but I wanted to know. But I wasn't met with that the soft, oh, I'll tell you this. It was more of the hard, why do you need to know kind of thing. And so I pushed back on it and said, well, okay, never, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to open that door. And I think sometimes we get silent because we don't want to offend. We don't know how that's going to go. We don't know how the other person will receive that. I think that's one of our bigger blocks because everything's so touchy. Everybody's so touchy. You don't say this. You don't say that. You use this word, you're using the wrong word. It's not politically correct. How do you do? So I think we do have to have the dialogue, even like we said, even if it's uncomfortable, because how are we going to bridge the gap? How are we going to do that? And I've seen it on both sides where, there's been resistance. There's been this push-pull sometimes. So, yeah.
Well, I think change is always difficult, right?
Yeah, it is.
So with any change, you're going to get people that are going to push so hard against it. Then you have people like me just pulling up with the truck going, throw the bricks in. I'm ready to go to the dumpster, right?
Yeah.
We're of all extremes. And for me, it's always, okay, read the room. Is this germane to, if we're in a work environment, is this germane to the work we have going on?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because then truthfully, I don't have time for the engagement. In the case of the woman you were speaking with, well, she can now come to work maybe because she has an ally and she feels that she can identify and that's a totally different conversation. Mm-hmm. But if someone at work asks me about my personal life and it's not germane to what's going on and I didn't offer any information, it's like, can we focus on the job at hand right now, please? Yeah. Right. Maybe when we become friends, I'll share. I have no problems with that. Yeah. But it's not always germane. So you have to, I think, be sensitive to the room. And then again, I think it flows from the top down if it's an issue or not.
True.
Right. So I remember one of the first companies I worked for, and I loved Frances. She was the craziest woman I've ever worked for. And she was every race that ever walked the earth running through her veins. And I was like, this is what I want. This is who I want to be. I wanted to be Frances, and really because of her history, of her family history, and everything, it was like, we're just doing a job here, folks. We're just trying to be successful. And it was such a brilliant lesson. And it wasn't until probably a year where we all worked together where we actually had intimate knowledge of each other. But that's not how it started because that's not what it was about. It was about, yes, we are all different. Yes, we are a crazy bunch of people here. But we have a job to do. And it's that collective craziness that's making us successful. Do you know what I'm saying? So there was no charge from the top down. So there was no reason to even worry about any of it. It just is.
Mm-hmm. I think, but Richard, thinking about that and how over the last few years, everything has been so sensitive about pronouns. And I think that has kind of taken the lid off of things that we would have kind of kept the lid on. But when that comes up and it's not addressed properly, or there's there's a mix up in the pronoun that you use to identify someone, I think then
it goes to a word we were using the other day, weaponization, right? So we have now weaponized people's desire to be addressed with whatever pronoun.
Right.
I'm of a certain generation. I admit I screw up all the time. And I when it comes out of my mouth, I'm conscious of it.
Yeah.
I don't apologize because it's not a matter I need to make attention, because then the next time I need to use the pronoun, I am conscious of, okay, make sure you drop on the right pronoun. It's a shift. Yeah. And it's the simplest thing to do. If that's the pronoun you want, hey, have at it. What does it do to my life? Right. If it makes you a happier person, a more productive person, then that for me is the ripple in the pond of life I want. So it's such a simple task. It's such a simple ask. So you're weaponizing something that's so simple.
Yeah.
Takes so little energy. But it's an easy target.
Yes. Yes.
So
Mhm.
the weak go for the easy.
Oh,
Yeah.
easy's always the aim. I think I saw in the chat someone mentioned, people aren't always open to being corrected. And that's because
Yes.
it's easier to make an assumption, to make an overt gesture and just be like, that's what it is, than to be corrected and have to self-evaluate. So much more
Yes.
easier. And
Right.
it's so much more easier to use a person's dead name because that's what I have in my mind. That's
Yep.
what I practice. Or to use a different pronoun because that's just who I am. I believe in you are supposed to be this pronoun no matter what. But like Richard said, that easy change, we have to kind of move towards it. If you like it, I love it for you.
Right.
Meaning I don't have to accept that pronoun, but if you like it, I can love it for you and still be able to, work with you. Because that, I think what Richard mentioned is so important. Isn't germane to the work that we're supposed to be doing. So here, LifeGuides absolutely is, because we're about human empathy, peer-to-peer connection. We're about building a community that reflects the diversity and the inclusion of the US. So it is. And I get it, in some people's, it may not be, but you have to sit down and really have that evaluation and talk about what's important within your organization. So I want to ask both of you about resilience, because you talked about the pronouns, and pronouns has been a topic of contention for what I can remember the last 5 years. How do you stay resilient, to continue to be yourself in a world where you're being told being yourself is not acceptable? And I don't just mean the, queer community part. I mean also the intersectionality for you, Rich, being a white male, for you, being a Black woman. There's intersectionality there too. So how do you continue to stay resilient?
What choice is there? Lack of resilience means I live in despair. Despair is a single note. And I want to live in this symphony. I want to hear a full orchestra. So I look for hope always. So, resilient, I mean, it's just, I am here. And while I'm here, I look forward. I have my hand back to help pull people forward, pull the next generation forward, but my eyes are always forward looking.
Drop the mic. Richard always drops the mic. I love it.
Sorry.
I absolutely love that. And I am going to piggyback on that and say, I don't have a choice. I do, but who I am doesn't have a choice. That's who I am. To remain resilient, because the umbrella of LifeGuides that I have chose to partner myself with, there's no other way. That's what we stand for. We stand for that resilience and for that connection and so much more. So there's just no other options on the table for me other than that. And it has proven itself to be such an asset to have that, that why would I want anything else? Just like Richard said, just saying it in a different way. Why would I want anything else? And so watching the result of how that has unfolded in my career and how it has unfolded in my personal life, the resilience is just a part of who I am. It was something that I had to grab for at first, right? And then incorporate it. And now it's just a part of me. It's no separation there. There's nothing to separate. The resilience game.
And also, let's not get it too twisted. Being resilient and choosing to be here doesn't mean you get everything you wish for.
True.
Right? So the two are separate.
Yeah, right?
Okay, this is not magical thinking.
Yes.
That's so true. And it's a good ad, because sometimes we get caught up in things are supposed to be the way that we want to be. Yes. Or they're supposed to unfold. Or one thing I like to talk about whenever I'm engaging with someone from a different community is what are your expectations for my reaction or my response? Because, for example, I've had people who have let me know, like, hey, I'm gay. And I'll say, that's wonderful. And they'll say, well, I wasn't expecting that from you. I said, well, what were you expecting? Because if you expect a certain response and I don't give it, you're going to immediately, respond accordingly to what you feel. So sometimes it's important to check with others and say, hey, what were you expecting? Because I'm just going to give what I feel is truth. What you do or what you feel is your truth. But we can agree that both can be simultaneously true at the same time.
Yeah, sure. Very true. Yeah.
Oh, sure. I mean, there's more you have to, I think, correct if the reaction you gave was negative.
Oh,
right?
100%.
The action you get right, if you give just neutral to like whatever, it's like, oh, I got to check myself. I was expecting the negative. So now the onus is on me.
See, that's what I was saying before. There you go. Sometimes you have to examine it from the other end because that can create a block to what we're trying to create. And so, yeah.
That reminds me, Richard, what is you mentioned it when we were doing our preliminary talks. I just remember what the name of it is, RAIN. But is that appropriate to share? Would you like to share that?
Oh, sure. I've been listening. Like I said, I've been listening. Tara Barch has a podcast. Tara Barch. I can give it to you guys and we can post it out later. She does Dharma talks, and one of the ones that I finished listening was a 2-part on fear. And she uses this acronym RAIN: recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And it really helps us. Again, it goes to that taking a breath, taking the beat, learning to, is this my issue? Is it coming from the outside? Is it you saying, oh, that's great, you're gay, whatever. And all of a sudden I'm like, the hairs on my neck stand up because I'm still in old fear.
Yeah.
So I kind of go into that RAIN process to slow me down, to take assessment. And sometimes like a good dyslexic, first, sometimes it's nurture, investigate, allow, and
Shout out to the dyslexics in the group. All right, keep going.
Well, sometimes you just, you attack it as you're comfortable. But either way, it's out my ownership for my interaction with you. I can't make you own my response. I have to own my response. And I can shape my response. I can stay silent. I can engage. I can walk away. That's how I can shape it. But it's all the energy that I use when I take any of those actions. That for me is the most important part.
I amplify that. I think it is the most important part. And I like the idea of RAIN because it helps us to kind of take a pause sometimes. We can be so, you got to move on to the next thing, or you really have time to acknowledge what's happening. But sometimes, like you said, that dyslexic part, starting with the nurture part first, may be advantageous for that contextual situation you're in, because you want to start to nurture what they're going through. We're coming down to the end here. I feel like we just started, to be honest. And I want to open up, if there are any last questions that you have for the group, please pop it into the chat. But I want to thank everyone who joined us. Again, thank you for joining us live for this session. This is our, I believe, second, perhaps third LifeGuides Connect. So we appreciate all the love and support we've received. We're building a community, people. That's really what all this is. We're building a community where like-minded, and I'll go even further from like-minded, like-hearted people, can get together. And even though we have differing views, different perspectives, and different ideologies, we can still come together and work to build a better workplace for everyone. Because let's be honest, if you were in the workforce in, 2001, 22 years ago, things were a lot different than they are now. And I can
Woo.
honestly say, even as a privileged man to be in that position, I'm happy where we are now. Because some of the bonehead things that were going on, even at the time, I was like, this doesn't feel right. But we
Right.
go along with it because society says so.
Mhm.
Any
That's why
last
we don't
Yeah, go
we
ahead.
don't have room to get exhausted. We don't have room to be fatigued. We have to keep going. We have to keep we just have to keep setting it, and we have to keep passing that torch. It's
Yeah.
important.
And Dave, I think you just landed on something for me that is really important. Being like-minded is not important. Being like-hearted is. Because truthfully, being with people who aren't like-minded teaches me something. Intellectually, I get something from that. I can learn. Being with people who are not like-hearted hurts.
Woo. Yes.
Now I'm thinking about all those times where it did hurt. Yes, yeah. But I'm also
Right?
thinking about the times when, I felt like I learned something. Like I came away like I didn't know that about, these people, this culture. 'Cause
Mhm.
it's not just, about the queer community. It's about, racial identity or even just cultural identity, regional identities, learning that some people, depending on where they are, eat their food a little bit different. It's like, well, that's
Mhm.
fascinating. Maybe I'll try that, even though I'm not from your region, but I'd like to try
Mhm.
that. The more that we do this, the smaller this world becomes, which is good because it already is a small world. We act like it's a large.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. So
Yeah.
true.
Jupiter is a large world. The Earth is not so large.
I'm about to say, very good point. We could fit in different parts of Earth into a Jupiter. So until we colonize that planet and make it the new location, all right, maybe wrong choice of words. When we maybe when we collectively unite and build a better planet on Jupiter together,
Mhm.
like Ray Bradbury, right? Ray Bradbury, the creator of Star Trek, said, once we do that, then we can have fun.
Yeah, we got to finish working on this one first before we start on another one.
Oh, absolutely, right. You can't leave here until we fix home. Got to take
Yeah,
care.
right.
Got to take care of home
That's
first.
the point. Yeah, fix home first. Yeah.
Well, that could be a strong takeaway for everyone.
Yes.
For anyone who is leading this conversation, start at home. Start having the conversation with your kids.
Yeah.
And leave out all the fear. Leave out all the fear. The fear that it's confusing, or the fear that you're going to turn your child into a gay child. Leave it all out and just
Yeah.
lead with love. Like, I'm going to love you, however, wherever you show up.
And to that, also allow that you had expectations. And that's okay. We all have expectations. Doesn't mean because someone took a different turn that it's a negative outcome.
And my last take is don't be afraid to have the tough conversations.
Well, that's a wrap. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this Life Guides Connect. We appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out with us, having a lovable conversation. I know I learned a lot today. I hope you did too. Once we pop this onto the YouTube channel, for those of you who don't know, we are now accessible on the YouTube channel for archive videos. So if you want to go back and check out Leslie and Richard's first time on what was a different, a different platform, go and check us out, like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you all.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you.